Here we are. So we're sort of unorthodox interviewers. It's untypical probably to family members getting a perspective into you and your career. So hopefully we can shed some light on more than just the nuts and bolts of being an attorney, but also the life outside that.
So why don't you say your name and what you do?
Frank Jackson, and I am a full-time criminal defense lawyer.
Yes, you are.
How many cases have you tried?
I've tried probably close to 400, and I quit counting not guilty verdicts at 111.
Why did you quit counting? It seems like something
I just couldn't keep up with it.
Couldn't keep up.
I've had several since then. 2 or 3 or 4 since then, but I've forgotten how many exactly.
Impressive ratio.
Can you tell us about your childhood a little bit? How you grew up, where you grew up?
Grew up in Paris, Texas, very modest means. My trip out of the sort of poverty level that I was living on was athletics. So at a very young age, I just sort of focused on athletics and football, basketball, baseball, track, anything that was in season. So dug my way out that way.
What was the pull to athletics? When was the first spark that pulled you in that direction?
First thing that pulled me in that direction is my older brother Charlie came home from grade school when I was about 6 years old, before I was even in grade school, and they permitted them in Paris, Texas, in the grade schools to check out, like you check out a library book, athletic gear. So he checked out a football and brought it home. And I was out in a little vegetable patch next to the house, and I remember this very vividly. And I was just a kid. And he came home in the afternoon from school, and I wasn't in school yet, and he pitched me the football. And I caught it, and that was the end of that.
Your first touchdown.
I was finished.
Your first touchdown run.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about your high school athletic career.
High school, I played football, basketball, baseball, ran track, and I was pretty much a natural athlete. Genetically, I had the right kind of genes, so I was the fastest boy in my city, and was actually in the district, and went to state 3 years in track, in the 100-yard dash and 220 in those days it was 100 yards instead of meters. And I was always always in finals and state meets, and basketball was a passion.
How about your state championship in baseball?
When I was a sophomore in high school, Paris High School won the state championship. I was a sophomore, the only sophomore on the team, and we beat to win the state championship. We went through Lufkin, Beaumont, Amarillo, and finally Abilene. Just in postseason. Then besides our district, you had to win the district championship, and that was Sherman, Denison, Greenville, Gainesville, those schools.
Tell us about your Abilene game, because that's known as the catch.
The catch.
That's a famous Texas sports story.
The Abilene game was the finals, and the score was, I think, 2-1. That's a goes back so long ago now. We were ahead, and it was the bottom of the 7th. We only played 7 innings. Abilene was at bat. They had a runner on second, 2 outs, and their best hitter, Green, a kid named Green, got up bat, and he hit a long ball that looked like it was going to the wall, and I ran it down, made a catch. I was playing center field.
You saved the home run, didn't you?
Saved the home run and saved the game. If it had fallen in, they would have won the game. They had 2 runners on base, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How did your athletics square with your academics? Were you?
I was more of an athlete in those days, but I just, like most young people, I had a natural. Some people have average IQs and average academic abilities, and they get by okay. Well, I made pretty good grades. That was not my central focus. My focus was athletics, and school was sort of secondary at that point. But I read voraciously. I read everything I could get my hands on. when I was like a sophomore, junior in high school, I read like War and Peace. I read Solzhenitsyn had just come out with what was it, the Gulag Archipelago, and it just, so I read that. Yeah, I read
pretty sophisticated
yeah,
literature
and,
for
well,
Paris, Texas.
Luckily,
rat.
I had a place. There was a used book. No, I mean, I'm sorry, a book distributor that had a facility right across from our house on First Street, Paris, Texas. And it was a huge facility. And I hung out there a lot, and I would glean the books and pick out the ones that I was interested in, and I was always reading everything. I read napkins at restaurants. Well, I just had this insatiable curiosity to learn, but it wasn't necessarily organized like school. It was more or less self-perpetuated.
So take us through, just to keep it moving forward. I know people are most interested in your legal career here, but just take us through. You played football, and did you also play baseball in college? Yeah.
Played baseball in college for a couple of years, and then I ran track at SMU for a couple of years, and then I got sort of disenchanted with SMU. I didn't much care for it anymore, and it sort of a stepping stone to professional football. So I couldn't wait to leave SMU. So at the middle of my senior year at SMU, I left and went to East Texas State University at that time, Texas A&M Commerce now. And I started all over again academically because my grades at SMU were not good because I was so focused all on athletics. And I knew I had the capacity to do better. So I went to East Texas State and majored in chemistry, biology, with a heavy emphasis on physics and math.
But there's another formative piece in here that I think speaks to your legal career, which is your preaching.
Well, that's sort of that was a peculiar period of my life.
Well,
I was a licensed Methodist minister for 6 or 7 years.
You did revivals, didn't you?
I did revival meetings all over Arkansas, Louisiana, and you're right, that really set the stage for courtroom. What you do in the courtroom.
You were a persuasive speaker.
Right.
You really honed those skills.
And I studied it pretty hard because I was preaching. And so when you preach and you're doing evangelical work, you're persuading, you're selling things. And people ask me sometimes, youngsters ask me sometimes, what would you suggest I do to become a lawyer, a trial lawyer, a lawyer? And I have 3 things that I usually talk to them about, or 4. Number 1, learn all the computer skills now, because that's what you live with now. Number 2, take a good typing course. Number 3, study all the televangelists. Spend a lot of time watching televangelists work. And then 4th, sell in the off season. Go sell encyclopedias or something. Sell something. Learn how to sell. Learn to speak in triplets like great speakers do. Learn the techniques of persuasion that you see televangelists do. And I also recommend Hitler as an example of great oratory. Even though you can't understand unless you speak German what he's saying, you see his delivery, and it's magnificent. It's just, his delivery alone is persuasive.
So the message was a little.
Teach those things. I know you didn't want me to go into a lot of detail about that.
No, that's interesting. I think.
Well, it's interesting to me because I think those examples are very important. I think if kids can do that, and young kids, everybody's a kid to me at my age, but who aspire to be in the courtroom and live in a world of oratory and thinking on your feet and putting sentences together and speaking in the techniques that really are persuasive, like triplets. 7 years ago, our forefather brought forward conceiving liberty and dedicated the proposition all men are created and endowed with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
There's your triplet right there.
Okay.
And so you played 7 years pro ball, right?
Right.
Kansas City, Miami, started with the
Dallas
Dallas
Texans.
Texans.
We moved to Kansas City and the Dallas Texans. 61 and 2 with the Dallas Texans, ancient history. And then when I was in the Army, I went to, between seasons, I was about to be drafted, and I volunteered and went in for 6 months active duty. And while I was at basic training in Fort Polk, Louisiana, the Texans moved to Kansas City. I had a drill sergeant that told me about the move, upending our whole lives because I was married at the time and you were conceived when I was in Fort Polk, Louisiana.
That's right.
And so
I remember it well.
That's when we learned that. Well, that's when we learned we were moved. So we moved to Kansas City in '63, and I was with Kansas City Chiefs '63, '64, '65. I picked up, wasn't protected because I was in medical school.
Sure, definitely.
Football figure.
And so I was picked up, but I already announced I wasn't going to leave Kansas City because I was in Kansas City College of Osteopathy and Surgery Medical School. And I was the first one that Kansas City picked.
Miami.
Even though Miami, I'm sorry. Even though I didn't, I already announced I wouldn't go. And I played 2 years there, and that was the end of that.
Yeah.
How about, how did sports and the idea of competitiveness, did that feed into your practice of law? Do you feel like, how can we tie those two things together?
You can always tie those together because sports are competitive. The law is competitive because there's always two sides to an issue, well, most of the time. And law is a contentious profession of necessity. It's an adversarial, well, when you're in athletics, you're adversarial, and you compete, and you have competitive juices flowing all the time. Well, that's exactly what you have to have as a lawyer. You take a side, you do whatever's ethical, and that's the key component. You do whatever you can to protect your client or your particular position in the law within the parameters of ethics. And that means you don't bribe witnesses, you don't suborn perjury at all, never those things. But whatever legal avenues are available to protect your client's interests, you competitively take those positions and pursue them vigorously.
Well, you've talked about a little bit about your, I don't know if it's jumping into the courtroom style, we're talking about vigorous, you talk about the value of aggression as an attorney. What do you see as the benefit there?
Well, I feel like that, you know, I've done, like I explained to you all, I've done some little experiments along in the 400 or so trials I've tried. A few of them, I felt before I went into them that I was being a little too aggressive, and I thought about trying to tone down, be a little more formal presentation.
How did you get that impression from?
Well, because just my impression.
Jury impression, judge
No,
impression?
not jury necessarily, but my impression was that I've been a little overly aggressive. Like, for example, pretty close to contempt a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, I'll do a little experiment and tone it down, you know, and try to take a more gentlemanly approach, I don't know, more formal approach, and tone down the aggressiveness, the aggressive cross-examinations. And like if I had a woman witness, then I started treating them with sort of kid gloves and things like, which is, you know, paternalistic nonsense, but nevertheless I did it. And I found after that experiment, and one in particular, that's a long one, I won't go into it, but I learned then that when I took that approach, I didn't win. I'd get hung juries maybe sometime, or I'd get guilty verdicts. And then, so I changed, and one in particular was a rape case where I treated the complaining witness with kid gloves. My client was telling me he didn't do it, but I treated her with too much, you know, too gingerly. And consequently, we got a hung jury, and at the end of when the jury left, and I was able to communicate with them, the foreman of the jury, who was a chemical engineer, wrote this long essay about how if I'd been a little more aggressive with her, that they didn't like her at all, and that, you know, he didn't like the fact that I had treated her so, you know, with such kid gloves and taken such a soft approach. And he admonished me about it. Told me so, and I kicked back in another gear.
So it's a series of calibrations of finding the right levels.
Yeah.
Well, we wanted to jump to also your time in medical school. And when you were down that course, and then you got some advice which changed your whole course.
Well, I dug my way out of some pretty dire economic situations when I was younger. And I just knew that I didn't want to work for anybody. I wanted to be more or less my own boss. So the professions, and lump those plural, were my attraction, because I felt that you had more independence, and they were professions, and they were also, it was the ego thing, you know, where getting into a profession was sort of a challenge and fed the ego. So first thing I did when I got out of Texas A&M Commerce, East Texas A&M, my studies were chemistry, biology, physics, math, you know, the sciences. So, and I read Aerosmith by Sinclair Lewis, which set my soul on fire as far as medical research. And sometimes there's always a book catalyst there somewhere.
Yeah, literature's been a real guide for you.
It really is. And so I decided I would take a shot at medical. And I got accepted. I talked to the University of Kansas, and they were very adamant about quitting professional football, which I couldn't do because I had to make a living, moving into their student housing at medical school and things. And the restrictions were too great. Went over to Kansas City College of Osteopathy and Surgery, and they worked the program out where I could play football, go to medical training too.
Well, let's fast forward a bit to you running into Percy Foreman and what he had to say about your medical aspirations.
When I went to Miami, first I didn't have any place to live, so the editor of the Miami Herald sports page, Edwin Pope, who became a Hall of Fame sports writer, sort of befriended me.
This
He
is when you were
interviewed me
playing
in
for
a
the
hospital.
Dolphins.
My first year, I got my back injured in a game in Memphis, Tennessee. And so I was in a hospital in Miami. They put me on a plane on a stretcher and hauled me back to Miami.
Let's just clarify, back injury meaning
Three fractured
vertebrae.
vertebrae. Three fractured vertebrae.
Massive
Massive
back
muscle
broken badly.
Massive muscle damage, retroperitoneal hemorrhaging, and all that. So I was in the hospital like 3 weeks on my back due to that. That was in the exhibition season. So Edwin Pope came to interview me at the hospital, and we talked about Ayn Rand, you know, talked literature more than anything else. He was sort of fascinated, so we became friends. And he was a sports writer. He was a columnist, and that became. And after that, he was a very famous columnist. He became so he was my friend. We drank beer together and had great times. I moved in with him because I didn't have a place. While I was there at the Key Biscayne Apartments, Percy Foreman was staying at the Key Biscayne Hotel because he had just finished the Candy Mostler, Melvin Lane Powers murder case, which was an international case. It was scandalous. And so he was finishing that up. And I met him down at the bar, not the bar, but at the breakfast place downstairs at the hotel, the restaurant. He was eating strawberries and not paying attention anymore, having himself paged every few minutes, you know, so everybody didn't know he was there. Typical criminal lawyer, no ego at all. So I went over and I introduced myself, and he talked to me as much as you could talk to Mr. Foreman. He was very into Mr. Foreman. So, but he talked to me, and I told him I was a medical, and he told me. After a while we talked, but I told him I was interested in the law too, because I was in a transition period. And his comment was, you'll hear this quote, he said, "One must not let one's personality be confined in an 8-man cubicle." So I had a little epiphany when I was talking to him, and he wasn't the only reason that I decided to change courses. I mean, there were other things, like I read books. Here again, literature. I read several biographies of a really great old trial lawyer, Jake Early, Bill Fallon, who in New York he was called, by Damon Runyon wrote pieces about him and called him the great mouthpiece. You probably heard that expression. Bill Fallon, William Fallon was a New York gangster lawyer who, Damon Runyon, who was the great, writer, pegged him the great mouthpiece. And so I read the book, The Great Mouthpiece, about Fallon. Other great lawyers, I could go on and on about. I've been and it was at least a half dozen books.
So
And that
you went the legal route.
Oh,
Changed
that
course.
really set my soul on fire.
So once you finished law school in Miami and ended your time with the Dolphins, you returned to Texas.
I did.
What was the drawback to
Getting into
Texas?
law school at Miami was a monumental accomplishment too, because they were very, very selective.
Ah,
They were Ivy Leaguers. You know, and my competition was really pretty stiff there. And University of Miami is one of the most heavily endowed schools in the country, law schools, and so they were pretty selective. I had to talk a committee into letting me in there to begin with. When I finished that, I'm sorry.
oh no, just the return to Texas. Just,
I thought about staying in Miami, but as much as my politics and philosophy of life is contrary to most things Texas, I'm still a Texan,
Mhm.
and I was then, and that is like a siren song. It just pulls you in, and so I want to come home,
Mhm.
and so
And so that
I made that decision.
so you spent time first as a prosecutor in the prosecutor's office,
I
right?
went through, there was a hiring freeze at that time. Back in the Nixon administration, they put a hiring freeze because of our energy issues and certain political issues. So nobody could hire. And so I went in and made an application, and Mr. Wade, Henry Wade, who was the legendary district attorney of Dallas County, iconic figure.
Mhm.
And he and I really hit it off big. And of course, I've always played off everybody brings in the football aspect, and he knew me through that, so that always helped.
Sure.
Once you got the foot in the door, and then you had to perform after that.
Yeah, it's an unusual calling card to be sure.
Well, it was, but I always knew that wasn't going to just win cases for me.
Yes.
Nobody ever even knew I played football when I tried cases.
Mhm.
Even my clients now, I doubt one in hundreds even know I played football.
Mhm.
So that's not the, but anyway, to make a long story short and answer your question, I went in, Mr. Wade said, I'll hire you, but I've got to go get a variance from the county commissioner's court. But he did that, especially for me, and I'll love him forever for that, because
Yeah.
I was on the street and y'all were demanding food.
And we were hungry.
And so he put me on, went in and got the variance, and I went to the DA's office and spent a couple of years there.
And did you always know that you wanted to be a criminal defense lawyer?
Right. Never aspired to be anything else. I was definitely a closeted defense lawyer when I was prosecuting. I was there to get the training. I tried cases hard as a prosecutor. I tried my best not to do it unethically.
Let's keep moving because we're getting low on time, but what is the appeal of being a trial lawyer? Why was it that you wanted to be a criminal defense trial
In
lawyer?
a courtroom setting.
Well, simple. It's very simple, because that's where the action is.
Mhm.
It's where the drama is. You know, if I had to be a office lawyer, just giving legal advice, that would be very, very difficult for me. I wouldn't find that challenging at all. And so I never aspired to do anything else. The minute I hit the law school door, my whole aspiration was to be a criminal defense, not just a criminal defense lawyer, but a criminal defense jury trial lawyer. Go in,
Yeah.
pick juries, try it to a verdict, sweating verdicts in, the whole dramatic thing.
Picture. Maybe we should talk about some of this stuff.
Yeah, let's talk about some cases that you've done. Let's talk about your sort of focus on the insanity defense and the unusual amount of wins that you've had using that
Well,
highly unlikely defense.
I'm gonna have to kind of qualify that, because when I tried a lot of my insanity deals before they changed the law, back when I tried most of my insanity, I've gotten good results from the current law, but back in the old law there was a two-pronged test. First of all, the diminished capacity part of insanity, which means you couldn't, because of disease or defect, you couldn't conform, you're incapable of conforming your conduct to the requirements of the law. You're like a kleptomaniac, somebody like that. So that was your volitional prong of the insanity defense. Then the other prong was you didn't know right from wrong, period, because of the mental disease and defect. Well, to get a not guilty verdict on the on the right and wrong prong, you almost had to be a drooling in the shoe maniac. So I always adhered to the volitional prong, the inability to conform your conduct to the requirements. So I'm getting a little technical now, but that's where I went with the insanity defense. And then when they took that away after Ronald Reagan was shot, Congress all over the country went into session like a bunch of rhinoceroses in a rut and changed the law, took away the volitional prong, made it all the old McNaughton rule. Not you that because of mental disease or defect, you couldn't distinguish right from wrong. You didn't know what you were doing was wrong. So that really took the insanity defense kind of off the floor, because if you did any preparation or if you fled from the scene, then that was sort of indicative that you knew what you were doing was
Right.
wrong. So anyway.
What about you even specified further in insanity defense and worked with sort of the idea of cultural insanity?
Well, I tried a case one time where that was the theory of defense. It's the subject of a book called Worse Than Death. And it was a book about Abdel Krim Belichev, who actually executed 6 women at a large restaurant in Dallas. They were sitting at the bar. And the night before, he had had an encounter with them, sort of a sexual, so-called encounter. We couldn't get into much detail. But he walked into Ioannis, which was the meeting place for him, and he was a Moroccan national, and really, like a lot of, I don't know how to say this without sounding a little bit, it's not prejudice, but a lot of Arabic males are held in pretty high esteem. And he really held himself in high esteem, although I think he was a psychopath or something. But then he walked into Ioannis, which is the bar, and one of the girls insulted him. Said, "Here comes the monkey." And that set him off. He went back to his car, got a 9mm 13-shot Browning automatic, and went and executed 6 women. So beautiful girls, and they killed them all. And then he shot a couple other people in the bar. And the interesting part of that is, this is going on too long?
No, the cultural
The
insanity
interesting
idea.
part, the pretty interesting part of that, I had just been featured in D Magazine as one of the 7 top criminal lawyers in Dallas, just like a couple of weeks before this. And when he was arrested, then the columnist in Dallas, John Bloom, who was Billy Bob Briggs and the
Joe Bob,
satirist,
yeah.
Joe Bob Briggs, I'm sorry. So he wrote a column about the Abdel Krim Belichev. They called him the most hated man in Dallas at the time, the most hated man. So he wrote this column about, well, the most hated man, and if you really believe in justice, where are all these 7 lawyers that were featured as top criminal lawyers? Why don't they step up? So before he said that, before that column came out, the family of his girlfriend had come to me and wanted me to represent him, and I completely brushed them off because they had no money, and I couldn't feature getting involved in something like that without, compensation, because you can go bankrupt doing something.
Yeah, huge.
So I blew them off.
Yeah.
When that column came out, I picked up the phone and called them, told them to come back and see me, and I took the case.
Yeah.
Virtually pro bono.
Wow.
And we tried a cultural insanity defense, because he was a Moroccan national. I hired a Moroccanist. I hired a psychologist. And I hired a cultural, and the Moroccanist was a cultural anthropologist. And I hired a Harvard psychiatrist. And I hired a neuropsychiatrist, psychologist, named Homer Reed, I think, at the time. And because he had some physical things with his head, and this neuropsychologist was a brain psychologist. So I hired all those people, financed it out of my own pocket, and
Is that when
he
you
didn't get the death penalty, but they did. They absolutely gave him 6 life sentences.
Is that when you had him actually feel his?
I had the prosecutor was questioning my psychiatrist was talking about his brain injury. He thought he had a brain injury because they had this ceremony. The Muslims, Shiite Muslims, have this ceremony where they hit you in the head with a sort of an axe when you're like adolescent, not adolescent, but like teenage years. They have this ceremony and they hit you in the head with an axe. And so they were thinking that might have caused some brain damage that led to his aberrant behavior. Well, so when they were making fun of it, and so my psychiatrist, his name was Sheldon Zickelbaum, he looked just like Sigmund Freud. And as a matter of fact, during the trial, the prosecutor made some allusion to the fact that he was a Jewish psychiatrist's son.
Oh, wow.
And I got it argued, yeah, like Sigmund Freud.
Right.
You know,
And
so
disparage
anyway,
him.
played into our hands. So the prosecutor was making light of the fact that he had any head injuries or anything. So that my psychiatrist from the witness says, well, if you like, I'll show it to you. The prosecutor, like a dummy, said, well, okay. So he goes down and puts his hand, and this is a defendant who's killed 6 people. Smoked, and they're down there feeling in his head.
Wow.
And he actually had indentions in his head where it had been hit.
But that's an example of the insanity defense that didn't work for you. Super interesting, obviously, at this time. It was well before the whole Muslim scare and all this stuff, so it's really actually current right to this day.
It is.
But you also won something like 4.
I've run about 6.
6
not
insanity.
guilties, and like a couple or more, 2 or 3 more hung juries.
Right.
So I got, in this case, there was no chance in winning this case by not guilty by reason of second. There's 6. You can't overcome 6
Right.
beautiful young women.
Well, I think that correct me if I'm wrong, that was your commitment and belief in the system and the fact that everybody deserved a fair trial, and you just were sort of stepping up on the basis of your belief, your real belief in fairness and justice.
I had a more highly developed sense of that at that time, and now I've become a little more cynical about it. But we still try them, and I still get not guilty, but the insanity defense kind of went by the board, and now it's you use other scientific techniques.
I was always struck by when we were growing up, you would come home with cases that seemed just clear cut that somebody was guilty of the crime, and then we would say, well, they did it. Of course they did it, right? And you were always you never ever passed judgment. You said, they are my client, and it's my job to make sure that they get the best defense possible. And that used to drive me crazy, because I was like, but Dad, it's obvious.
Well, a lot of times I would have to explain it this way, that it doesn't matter what they do, it's whether or not they're legally guilty of a crime. And I'd explain, that sometimes you can do what you're accused of having done, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're guilty, because you have defensive theories. For example, you shoot someone with a gun, first assumption is guilty of murder, shot him with a gun. Then it's developed in court by people like me, that at the time that the defendant shot the deceased with a gun 6 times or whatever, the deceased was coming at the defendant with an overhead axe, double-bladed axe, ready to split his head.
There's always more to the story.
So he did what he was accused of having done, shot the guy to death, but he wasn't guilty of a crime because of self-defense. Well, that's a classic example. And there are hundreds of instances like that, not just self-defense, defensive theories all over the board. I may be going on too much.
No, it's good. We just want to make sure we include all the best stuff. Things you're doing too. That, or skip on down to these things.
Well, we had the Oswald case that we were going to talk to you about, Marina Oswald, but we're kind of low on time. Let's see. How about just your style in the courtroom, the aggressive approach that you talked about? You were also telling us about a couple of times that you were just this close to being held in contempt. Because you were...
that goes back to the competitive issues, and competition is, and pride and competition, and the fact that you want to, and when you say win in the legal context that I'm talking about, it doesn't mean subverting justice. You don't win by subverting justice. You win by making the state prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt by competent evidence. And the aggressiveness is being very, very aggressive and not permitting the state to run over you and get evidence into, or get issues into evidence that are not legal or not shouldn't be. Making objections, and then when you're making objections and the prosecution's trying to get it done, you're trying to keep evidence out, then it gets very, very contentious.
Okay, well that's all very, sort of ethereal, but I want to hear a specific example where you were almost held in contempt. What's the closest you've gotten to be thrown in jail? let's say?
Well, there's been
Because
several.
I want people to have a picture of who
Well,
Frank Jackson is.
one time I was arguing with the prosecutor back in the jury room after we got a hung jury, and he was yelling in my ear, and I poked him in the shoulder, and they detained me out in the courtroom.
Didn't you also say something to him?
Well, I did, but I'm not sure I need to.
We can bleep, I'll bleep it.
I told him to kiss my ass.
I missed the beat.
And I told the other prosecutor that I wasn't through with her either. And so I guess pretty at the borderline contempt because I was in the jury room, which is part of the courtroom.
Mhm.
If it had been outside in the hallway, it probably wouldn't have had any effect. It would just been in me. But when you're in the courtroom decorum doesn't permit that. And I really wasn't proud of it. And after it was over, I apologized and opened the court for doing it. But the judge could have filed. They could have filed a Class C misdemeanor on me at the time,
Mhm.
and I would have had to go to jail, post bond.
And just for posterity, it's probably important that we point out that that's not the only time.
No, it's not the only, but other times.
So being a criminal defense attorney requires that kind of commitment where you get personally involved in this, don't you?
You like to think you can maintain objectivity when you think when you really feel in your heart that the prosecution is screwing you or your client. And when I say me, screwing me or I'm doing this or whatever, when I use those personal pronouns, I'm talking about my client. I feel very strongly we just stand in their place. We take the place of the defendant.
Yeah.
They just become more or less animate objects over there. The whole focus in a trial is on the lawyering until or unless the defendant takes the witness stand. Until then, he's just another prop over there.
Mhm.
So we talk about, I'm getting prosecuted, I'm going to trial, they're going to prosecute me in this case, in this case, in this case. They found me not guilty, they found me not. We use those personal pronouns because we're sort of them,
Mhm.
if you really believe in what you do.
We've watched how empathetic you are. I think you and other great attorneys really bond and attach with your clients and their families so deeply. How do you maintain enough connection but enough distance that if the trial doesn't go as you want it to, you're not just bereft and devastated?
We are devastated. If we aren't personally involved, and we only get personally involved when we really think our clients didn't do what they're accused of having done, or if they did what they're accused of having done, they aren't guilty of a crime, or they were goaded into it by somebody. And if we feel like the whole case is unjust, then it becomes very personal. And some of a great many of my clients are salt of the earth type people. They just get caught in a bad situation. Well, I get personally involved. And the other clients I don't get personally involved with. I try my best to work my heart out for them. But it's not a personal involvement because of a lot of different factors. And I don't take clients home to dinner.
Mm-hmm.
Or get into their personal lives unless it relates to my case prep. Some of my clients are just flat good people, and they get caught up in some criminal. Then it's very, very difficult to distance yourself from their problems. And we become very personal at that point.
And in every case, as you said, it's true, isn't it, that this is their lives on the line. This is very important in every single case. It's got real consequences to their lives, which I think is something that you really take to heart.
It really is. For example, sex cases now. When I say sex cases, the tragedy today is everybody lumps sex cases under one big category: sex assault or sexual harassment. Actually, sexual offenses are broken down into a lot of different categories, a lot of different ways that sex plays into a criminal offense. And it drives me sort of crazy when they lump it all together. Somebody touches somebody inappropriately, they call that sexual assault. Well, it's not. Sexual assault is a specific crime. So my issue with what was the question?
Just taking it, you're dealing with somebody's life in a way, how important your job really is.
I was going to use sexual offenses as an example. Sexual offenses, if you're convicted of a sexual crime, most sexual crimes, you're a lifetime sex offender register. You have to register as a lifetime sex offender the rest of your life, which means you can hardly get a job flicking burgers at Burger King. And these are prominent people sometimes who are accused of that. And they have families, they have friends, they have loved ones, and they go to the ripple effect. But if you're convicted, even if you get a mitigated sentence, it's more or less a life sentence because your whole life is taken out from under you, and that's what you're referring to.
That's right.
Sex offenses are a classic example of that. The consequences are dire. I mean, dire. Even though it's a touching, perhaps. If you're guilty, if you're found guilty like a child, if you touch a child inappropriately, and you call it sexual contact, then you're just, your life is finished, more or less, if you're convicted. So that gets to be, pretty difficult, as you all know, you grew up with.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Pretty stressful.
We're kind of getting low on time.
Yeah,
so
we just
let's
have a few more questions to wrap up.
Sure.
This is the TCDL organization is behind this, obviously, and behind your Hall of Fame honor. What has the organization meant for you? What has it brought to your career and to your life?
Oh, I'm very much devotee of the TCDLA.
How long have you been involved in the organization?
Oh my God, 30, 40 years.
Oh, wow.
And I was a member of the board of directors of TCDLA for 6 or 8 years. Forgotten how many years. Long time. As a matter of fact, at one point I was chairman of the Hall of Fame committee. That was way back. That was before 2000. But I sort of set the standards for admission to the eligibility requirements. And my committees sort of wrote the criteria. And so,
How about support that it provided you, or
Yeah.
friendships and things?
TCDLA has been always a very open, welcoming organization for criminal defense lawyers. And the thing that's good about TCDLA is they don't permit judges to be members. Prosecutors can't be members. It's a defense organization, which appeals to me because our whole focus, TCDLA's whole focus is always on criminal defense.
You don't want that riffraff
Very
of judges and prosecutors in the same room, I understand.
No, you're right.
Yeah. I feel like we
You sort of covered advice to young lawyers, and
is there any areas you would want to go into that we haven't
I think we've touched on it. I think some of this will be interesting, and some of it probably won't be too
You've
interesting.
lived an
congratulations,
amazing
man.
life, and
Thank you very much.
such a vibrant
Thank you.
career, and inspiring, and a role model, I think, to several generations beneath you. So
Thank you, boys.
continued success.
Are a little prejudiced.
We are very
I
prejudiced.
appreciate the comments.
Yes, congratulations.
Thank you.